There's a really big face on my screen, Mark. Looks kind of like you.
Hi, this is Tom Kuhn. I'm off of mute.
Good afternoon, Tom.
Hi.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm expecting Greg Merritt to join me before too long.
Excellent. All right, so for your portion of the presentation, it should be pretty straightforward. There should be a blue button at the bottom of the screen, and so when it's your turn, you just click on Share Screen, and that should take over, and you should be able to run with it from there.
I don't really have anything that I'm going to be sharing beyond some text notes of my own. Maurice Manning suggested that I might present something in an email this morning, and I interpreted that meant today. So I said, okay, I was going to talk to some folks here. So I just borrowed some of my notes. So unfortunately, I don't have a presentation to show you guys.
Okay, that's not a problem at all. You can always follow up with one if that would be useful for you in the long term anyway. Other than that, you're welcome to paint a picture with words.
You're also Tom, welcome to tell me that I should come back next month and actually present something with slides so that you have a better picture of what I'm trying to talk about.
Yeah, that will work as well.
Hi, Tom and Kurt. This is Aaron. Tom, thanks for be willing to volunteer, even though it's sort of at an early stage. And I think the more people that can do that sort of thing, even if there's not a full presentation, I think that just helps us all get the sort of picture of what people are trying to do. And even better, if you also want to present next time with a more fully formed set of slides.
I'm making no commitment, but if that works out, that's fine. And I'm sure I can talk about things beyond what I've got going right now, because I've been up to my eyeballs in AWS stuff for the last 3 months or so.
No, that's really good, and it's potentially useful to share things at an early stage. There might be people on the call that actually have some relevant experience that can provide interesting and useful feedback to you. So
that'd be great, because for what I'm talking about with code deploy and code pipeline and things like that, it's still an early stage as far as I'm concerned.
Mm-hmm.
I see Greg descending the stairs.
Yes. It's got that Blair Witch thing going on. Watch out for the computer zombie at the lobby.
Psych, not going out there. Where are you, Tom? Are you at your desk? Or are you
I'm in room 5, the conference room.
Deeper.
Yeah. You've got to come into the inner sanctum.
Is this an example of how they treat people that work on AWS? They find the lowest, farthest corner of the building to sit you guys in?
I think politically speaking, I'm not going to say anything, so I can take bait. Although Greg and I would have to compare notes. He gets to sit on the 4th floor.
Yeah, that damn clock tower chiming every hour, just bugging us. You have to look out the window at it.
Hey, tell us that you're just trying to get closer to the Hayward fault, right?
Yeah.
When the big one comes, you want to get the maximum rumble out of it.
Oh, this building's going down.
Well, that makes me feel good, Greg.
I've got farther to fall.
Yeah, well, you'll land on me.
I can do this when you're
All right, we're creeping up on our sort of nominal figure of 20 or so participants. So we'll give it another minute and then we'll launch. We'll give Andrew time to adjust his camera. Little front, little back. I don't know if isn't scientifically speaking, isn't one side of your face your good side, and so we should all have our video cameras on either the left or the right.
Unfortunately, both sides are bad for me. I could do this. That's probably better.
Oh, hey, Kurt, I tossed in a City on the Cloud application, so thanks for sending that around.
You're certainly welcome. Yeah,
Cool.
again, I had that question initially whether that was available to our sector, and our account team assures us it is. So if there's money out there, we might as well go for it.
Yep.
Try to get our share. All right, and that said, yeah, we've the starting this meeting is kind of like watching the microwave popcorn bag. You have to sort of judge the frequency of people joining the meeting and the ideal time to sort of stop the microwave before the popcorn burns and when you've got critical mass. So let's get going for today. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our May meeting. I'll start with the usual reminder, which is that participation is key in making a group like this sustainable. And so I want to thank all those who have agreed to contribute content or ideas to this meeting, some of you at the very last minute, and urge the rest of you to go out to the blank agendas for the two remaining meetings that are posted, June and July, and sign up to share information. Or find your colleagues, back them into a corner, twist their arm, and get them to sign up to share information to all of us. The more data you put into this type of group, the more benefit you and others will get out of it.
That was a rapid exit.
There we go. Sorry, had to slam my door
was that
closed.
A mic drop?
Had to close the door to the office before we heard things we probably shouldn't hear. So I want to also let everyone know we've got an outstanding request to share information about secure, repeatable deployments in AWS. So to that end, we have a presentation today about using Ansible for code deployments. Also talk about someone who's using AWS tools, code pipeline, code build, and code deploy. And next month, we have someone signed up to share information about their deployments using CloudFormation templates. So to sort of round that picture out, we're looking for a volunteer to talk who is using OpsWorks, Chef, or Chef Automate. So if you or someone you know is using that tool set within the environment, please let me know. And let's try to get them to chime into the conversation. Also, everyone, please respond to the message I sent out to the group this morning about how you're handling AWS training for your particular efforts. So that's also an outstanding question we had. How are you getting your teams up to speed? How are you sharing that information with others in your group or on your campus? And I took a crack at sharing what we had done first. So if you could chime into that thread, those of you who have anything of interest to say, that would be greatly appreciated. I'll also mention here that UCCSC 2017 is rapidly approaching, scheduled for August 7th through 9th at UC San Diego. And the intention is to convene the second annual in-person UC AWS user group meeting at that event on the afternoon of Monday the 7th. Adam Tillman has bravely volunteered to coordinate logistics for that meeting. And I'm sure that he will happily accept help from any others on the UCSD campus who want to contribute. We have our AWS account team lined up to be present again this year with some raffle prizes for the lucky few and also useful information for everyone who's present. Hopefully some of you have submitted proposals for presentations about your AWS related efforts to UCCSC, and I look forward to hearing them later this year. Here at CDL, it's been mostly a year of consolidation, so I didn't feel like we had anything exciting to talk about, and we didn't submit a presentation, which gives some of you a welcome break from hearing my shameless self and AWS promotion again this year. Also like to thank David Cooley from UCI for the now obvious suggestion that I should create an introduction to the group document posted up on the Google folder with the agendas so that newcomers to the group can easily ground themselves in what we're all about and come up to speed on how we're operating currently. So I'll get that created in the not too distant future. So with all of that said, let's jump right into things. We've got a number of topics to talk about today, and we're going to start off with Mark Reeder from here at CDL, who's going to talk about his experience using Ansible for deployments in the AWS environment.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yep.
Okay, let me share my screen and let me get the presentation up. Oh no. Yeah, all right. Can you see my screen?
I see your face. There.
What now?
Oops, now we do.
Your screen is coming on, yes.
Okay. So this is just a short lightning talk, so it's only about 5 minutes. So I've been using Ansible for a little while now to provision these transient worker machines that we have that do metadata ingest for the Calisphere product, and it's been working pretty well for me. So oh no, what did I do? Sorry. There we go. Okay, so in Ansible's words, this is it. It's a simple IT automation. You can deploy applications and get your systems in the state that you like. And it doesn't require any agents on the local machines. They just have to have a fairly recent version of Python and SSH access to the machines. My words, yeah, it's agentless. So you install it only on your central controlling box, and you have to have access to the target machines through SSH. And again, it has to have a fairly recent version of Python, which any of the Linux versions do have. There's no need for root privileges. That is handy in some of our servers that are run by the Kurtz group, where we don't really have accounts, so it can be used for that. It's got batteries included. It has all sorts of modules that are configured in a declarative YAML syntax, and they do a lot of error checking and such for you. It tends to be idempotent, so you can run it. You describe the state you wanted, and rerunning should leave it in the same state. There is a capability for encrypting sensitive data in it as well, and there's really good documentation and some good kind of standard best practices in setting up your Ansible system. A configurable inventory of machines is great. You can use kind of pattern matching to just run steps on certain parts of your infrastructure. And then there's a website called Ansible Galaxy that has literally thousands of pre-built roles for various installs of all sorts of different system tools and web servers and the like. This is basically how it works. You have a control box that maybe all these people log into, and you have an inventory file that describes what machines you have in your deployment, and you have various playbooks that describe the states of the various machines, and you can select and choose and run them on the various different groups of servers that you have. So again, you don't need to be root. It can run entirely in user space and become any user that you have the privileges to become on the remote machine. And you can also run it locally, and I've used that for setting up some of our role accounts that we have, where it's shared role accounts, and we need to get certain packages of software installed on those. Again, it's batteries included. There are loads of modules. This is the kind of YAML syntax that you see here. It's for a yum update everything to the latest, and then write out. It's got a templating system built in, so you can get configuration files with template variables that get filled in according to what machine you're on and what the variable is set to on that machine. And there really are a load of modules. That's part of a list of all the various different modules. They have stuff to control AWS instances and all the various packaging tools like apt and yum and all this, and just a ton of other stuff. It has an advantage over writing your own shell script because it's idempotent. You can run it again, and it just tries to get everything to the same state. And it also has it stops on error. So if it reaches any error, it'll stop on that particular machine and report at the end that it had an error on that machine. It'll grind away on other machines that you might be running against, but any errors it gets, it stops immediately and doesn't make any more changes. There's a tool called Ansible Vault that can encrypt secrets files. It uses AES 256 encryption, and usually use it to encrypt variable files that have maybe sensitive passwords and whatnot in it. And when you run the playbook, it decrypts the files on the fly when using the copy module that they have. So it'll decrypt it onto the target machine, and it actually does it out there. So that's the only place that the unencrypted version exists, is on the target machine. So you control it with an inventory file that you always feed into the various Ansible commands, and you can set up various groupings. Like here I have this prod children, so it's all the various production machines that we have. So I can just say, I can just say run this Ansible command on all the production machines, and it'll go out and do that. Or I can say run it on all the stage machines, or run it on the solar machines, or on all the solar stage machines. So you've got this pattern matching that you can choose groups of hosts and that you can set up in your inventory files. The inventory files also gives a way to customize variables for individual hosts in there. So an Ansible roles are kind of a little higher level of abstraction. They include all the variables and playbooks and various tasks and everything that you need to install usually one piece of software. And Ansible Galaxy, you can go out there and take a look, and it literally has thousands of roles that you can import or copy or look at for building your own roles. A lot of times there's GitHub repos backing them. So in a number of instances, I've forked the GitHub repo and used that as my source for setting up various pieces of software. And this is an answer because one of our colleagues is using Capistrano. So I actually haven't looked at this Anastrano project, but it's trying to duplicate some of the things that Capistrano does with versioning of the software and such. So it adds to Ansible this versioning and being able to roll back very quickly your software version. So I still haven't looked at it. And then just these are the URL dump. So that is about it. Any questions?
Mark, are you using this with AWS then? Just you got EC2s and then you use this to configure them?
Exactly. Yeah, we're probably going to switch that in a little bit and do it just when we do software updates to use a more image-based thing. But it has like AWS modules for creating EC2 instances, and then you just go out, and once it's created, there's something called we're using it to dynamically create workers that come and go. And so we use something called a dynamic inventory that can go out and look at what instances you have in EC2, and you have to tag your instances in such a way so you can subset them and then run your provisioning against those various machines. But yeah, that's what we're doing. Like we have some of our data analysts might have a bunch of stuff to run. So they'll say, give me 10 worker machines, and it goes out and creates the 10 worker machines. And then I haven't got it to do it all in one step because you have to wait till the workers come up, and then they run a provision command and they provision it, and then they get all these workers to work on their various metadata harvesting jobs. So stop sharing.
Have you compared to like using Cloud Init and or saving away AMIs?
I haven't. It would be, you would use it to build your AMI basically. Is the way that I look at it, because you've got all the various software that you're installing on a machine, and you can keep it in this YAML playbook that's a record of what you're doing on the machine. And in fact, that's the next. I got a little task that we're going to move to more of that. What we're going to do is when we update our software, is produce a new image, because that would definitely bring up the machines faster. But it's a way to actually create the original image and stuff. So,
and I guess if you wanted to switch cloud providers, all you need to do is be able to SSH in, right? And then you could just switch.
So it's not tied to a particular provider, which is a good point. I mean, it looks like we're pretty well bought into AWS now, but yeah, it's not specific to a provider. It can work on your local machine. It can work on a bare box somewhere, whatever. All you need to do is have that SSH access. And then if you're, you might have to have root access if you're installing something that needs root or whatever privileges you need on the target machines.
Cool.
So, yeah. And basically the reason I did it was because I like the fact that you didn't have to set up agents on all the machines, because that seems always the first step with like Puppet or Chef. You've got to go out there and like bootstrap it, and this doesn't need that initial bootstrapping. So it's kind of interesting.
That's a similar problem with code deploy. You've got to have an agent on the machine that you're targeting for deployment.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep, and when your environment is much more dynamic, which is one of the things we're looking for at AWS, right? Then requiring an agent install, up front becomes more of a barrier for entry.
Right.
All right. Other questions for Mark? Anyone on the phone who has any experience with the Anastrano project to share? Sounds like a no. Okay. Well, thank you very much for that, Mark, for sharing with the group.
Cool.
I'll get a link to his presentation. Yeah, I'll get a link to his presentation and put it into the agenda, so you'll be able to look back at the slides in the future.
Okay, cool.
All right. Next up, we have we're going to switch the order a little bit. We're going to hear from Tom Kuhn from UCB. Who's going to talk to us a little bit about his deployment process using native AWS tools like Code Deploy, Code Building, and Code Pipeline.
Okay, I'm going to say hi, everybody. This is a jump into the deep end introduction to the group. I was recruited by Maurice Manning this morning to maybe talk to you guys at some point, and I kind of misunderstood and assumed he meant today. So I put together some thoughts since we've recently been transitioning our project to using all of the native AWS build tools. And so I'll take a minute or two and describe what the project's about. It's called the Connected Corridors Project. If you've talked with Greg or he's talked about it at all, this is you might be familiar with it already. This is a project for Caltrans, the Department of Transportation, and we're building a large system for them to help them figure out how to best manage traffic incidents on corridors that have frequent traffic incidents. I could go into more detail, but I'll skip over that because we're all talking about AWS. We've been working in AWS since probably early 2015, so 2+ years, maybe almost 3 years. No, 2+, just over 2. The guts of this project are all in Java. And our target now is an entirely independent AWS VPC. When we started, we were using some of Berkeley campus address spaces, and we're now building our own VPC and trying to target everything to be deployed there. This is a multi-component, distributed, scalable, complex system. We can play buzzword bingo, but it's a pretty complicated thing. We've got a bunch of different components going to a lot of different kinds of instances, playing different roles. Some of them are auto-started and scaled as needed. And since today I'm really talking about build and deploy, I'll not go off too far into what the system is really like, but talk about how we build it. Previously, when we first started this project, we were trying to be somewhat cloud agnostic, not be tied in directly to AWS, but we're transitioning. When we started, we were leveraging what is now a maxed out GitHub account for all of our repos. We have probably more than a dozen repos specifically for this project, maybe almost 2 dozen. I'm kind of trying to figure out how many there are, but in any case, we've been leveraging Berkeley campus services for our build engine, which is Jenkins. And then we'd be deploying, as I said, to an AWS instance with a campus address, and leveraged an aging, now very aging, Maven Artifactory server that we were maintaining ourselves. So we have multiple motivations to move to AWS services. We're moving to this VPC with no campus address space, which means that some of the tests and things that we'd like to run and some of the tools we'd like to use can't be run in the way that we've been running them before, and we want to try to not rely on aging or license-bound infrastructure. So, you know, at the high level, we're moving to using AWS code commit for a sort of a GitHub replacement, or instead of GitHub. We use GitHub as well, but code commit for our new repos. We're using code build as our primary build tool. And we're just experimenting now with code deploy to get our built jars where they need to be. And Greg's waving at me.
Just a point that Tom made a minute ago, I wanted to just see that, you know, it was clear to folks is that when we were using the Campus Direct to Connect, our AWS resources looked like local to campus IP addresses. So the build and deploy was, you know, topologically or local, so we could just do that sort of more directly. But now all of our resources are in a private subnet that we tend to access through an EC2 running a VPN. So it's kind of more isolated with respect to campus and build systems. So that's why Tom was describing moving all of the build into AWS.
Right, thank you. So we got in the code deploy. One wrinkle in this that folks who are bound to Artifactory and Maven might be interested in is that we're using Amazon S3 as a sort of limited Artifactory server. I'd said we've been leveraging an aging Artifactory server of our own. And you can use S3 in that way with enough careful configuration and support. I wouldn't want to stretch it too far. It's not going to mirror or act in the same way as a full Maven Artifactory, but it's serving our purposes. And then we're trying to use Code Pipeline, or we are successfully, at least in one case, using Code Pipeline to tie these things together and manage all the steps in the build. Since I've been putting this together in the last few months, my general reaction, high-level comments as a beginner with these things, code commit was really quite a painless thing to bring up and use. If you're a Git user now, code commit isn't particularly complicated to use instead of GitHub or another Git compliant service. IAM roles and policies are always challenging, and they're challenging here too. When I added the S3 wrinkle, it makes things just that much more complex. My major reaction is that code build and code deploy are like fully capable tools, but they're complicated, and deploy in particular was complicated for me to get my head around. And when you get to the relationship of these components in a code pipeline, which is a service that tries to tie together a source from code commit to a build as a code build to a deploy and code deploy, it isn't always the clearest where the responsibility for one stage switches to the next. Amazon documentation was absolutely necessary, but it wasn't easy to work with. I just sort of wish they had a very high-level guide for what the services are really for and how you might want to divide up the responsibility for the different aspects of what you're trying to do. We don't have a particularly complicated deployment scenario where, for the one case that I've coded so far, it's an in-place deployment. We aren't trying to spin up a new EC2. We don't have an elastic beanstalk or a load balancer in the way. It's pretty simple, but it took some time to work through how to divide up the different tasks that needed to happen. Code build comments. If you've got a complicated repo structure like we have, you can build up a relationship amongst dependent builds. If you're used to working with Jenkins and building up a tree of dependencies so that this build will trigger the next build, will trigger the next build, you can do that with code build, but sort of the direction of the pointers for which build points to the other, it's reversed from what it would be in Jenkins. So something that depends on something else having built needs to point to that build and say, hey, when that artifact changes, kick me off. That's the opposite of Jenkins. Jenkins says, hey, when you completed this build, if it was successful, kick off these other builds. Code build does rely on a YAML file called a build spec, which you have to have access to in your repo, and it needs to come along when you check out all of the code. And then if you work with code build through the AWS interface UI, web UI, code build has a bunch of sort of templatized build environments. So if you've got an exotic kind of build that you're trying to do that isn't a straight Java or Python or standard kind of build, you might not find the template that you want. But it's worked for us. We're using Java 8 and Ubuntu and Linux, and it was totally fine for that. Moving on to code deploy. I do have notes that I'm going through here. I just don't have slides. I apologize. But I was jumping in at the last minute. So when you talk about code deploy, I found this to be very complicated, much more complicated than I expected. And the documentation was not particularly targeted as me as a maybe somewhat experienced, not a novice AWS person, but someone who hasn't had to manage a large set of EC2s or services out in the cloud until now. And so I found walking through the documentation to be really challenging. Code deploy, as I mentioned to Mark, it relies on a separate agent as well that needs to be installed and configured on the target instances. And I was thinking about that. It might be the case that you can have that code deploy agent running on one EC2 and then go off and have it go off and do something else on another EC2. I don't think that's the model that they're trying to target. The paradigm they're trying to use. So that separate agent installation caused me a number of headaches getting the right tools because it relies on a lot of other things like Python and Ruby and things like that that made me scratch my head. But I found in particular for Ubuntu 16, getting all the packages installed was just a challenge. Particularly if you're trying to do it from a cloud config script so that you have your instance all built for you when it started. Another aspect of code deploy, as with code build, it relies on a YAML file, in this case called an app spec file, and that has to get copied in with the bundle of files that you're trying to deploy so that when the agent unpacks the bundle, it knows what to do with it. The division of responsibility between the code build stages, so code build and that build spec YAML file, specs out a number of different stages, pre-build, post-build, are the ones that I rely on the most, but there are additional ones as well. But the division of responsibility between those code build stages and the stages that pop up in an app spec file was kind of challenging to figure out. Like, what was I trying to bundle up into something for code deploy? when I'm in the code build world? And then how do I divide up responsibility between this appspec YAML file and any scripts it might be invoking to start and stop and deploy the files from the bundle that gets dumped onto the target box? All of that said, I think Code Deploy provides a nice set of features when you've gotten to learn it. And it can support much more complex cloud deployment issues than I'm dealing with at the moment. I guess the last thing to talk about, I'd mentioned that S3 is an artifactory. It adds complexity to your build definitions. We really wanted to have an artifactory of our own, and we were debating setting up a JFrog image and running that versus trying to use S3, and it was almost a toss-up, but S3 won. You do have to work through the IAM issues carefully because access to the S3 bucket that holds your artifactory needs to be enabled for the right users and roles in all of this process that I was just describing. And that can be a little bit challenging to work through. And it's not a full Maven artifactory. So how it plays with Maven, it works fine for us. What isn't in our S3 bucket, Maven will go out and try to find in Maven Central. But our previous artifactory server was a mirror that would pull down artifacts from the cloud or the wider web, put it that way. And so there are a few artifacts like that that we have mirrored that are now no longer available. So we may find that we shove some of those into S3 when we can't find them elsewhere. But I don't know, it's worked well enough for us. And I will cede at this point and answer any questions anyone has.
Have you guys had a chance to look at CodeStar at all?
So one of the questions here was if any of us had gone to the AWS Summit, and a few colleagues of mine from the Connected Quarters project did go. I was only there for the second day, but enough to see a brief presentation of CodeStar. And I will admit, at the time that I was there, I was feeling particularly burned by trying to figure out Code Deploy, and I was thinking, you know, let's give it 6 to 9 months or maybe a year to burn in. My first, I just saw a 15-minute presentation, and they have particular templates for what you're trying to build and deploy within CodeStar, and none of the ones that they showed particularly matched ours. We could make it work, but I figured I'll give it a little while to burn in and get better documentation and usage, and maybe a couple more templates.
Gotcha.
Other questions for Tom?
Anyone else using these tools?
Nothing but silence. That sounds like a no.
Yeah, I take that as a no.
So you are paving the way. You're a trendsetter. You're on the bleeding edge.
Well, are there other folks who are doing their own development in a different way and then running on Amazon, or are folks tending to do, to use existing software for the most part?
There's some people here using Bitbucket pipelines and build and test automation using AWS. I don't know anyone who's running a full pipeline all the way straight to Amazon right now. At least this is UC Davis.
Okay. I can't say that I'm using a full pipeline for everything. I've got one pipeline up right now, and more on the way as we get more components that are getting built and deployed that way.
I'd say here at UC San Diego Health, we're in a very similar situation, kind of a hodgepodge, but moving towards this direction.
Good. Okay, excellent. Well, it sounds like Tom will have more useful information to share with you, so we'll ask him back potentially to talk again as he gets a little farther down the road with some GWiz slides and animations and data visualization. And you could also feel free to reach out to him directly if you have specific things that you'd like to talk about. I'm sure.
Yeah, I do intend to come back to more of these meetings, so I'll keep swimming within the pool.
Alrighty. Okay. Any other questions for Tom before we move on? All right. So back to my earlier comments. There's interest in hearing from anyone out there who's using OpsWorks, which is again sort of hosted Chef and/or Chef Automate within the environment, and/or anything else you're doing that you believe is clever or effective for your deployments within the AWS environments. I'm sure would find a ready audience from the group.
Can I get one question into Tom? I tried
Certainly.
to get off when I tried to off my mute. I hung up accidentally.
Go ahead, Maurice.
Do you have any diagrams, Tom, that you guys are going to put out sort of that shows how all those things fit together and the flow of sort of the overall flow between those tools and something? I think that'd be a really useful or something planned. Put a diagram like that together.
I can try to do that. I can tell you that when you have built a pipeline, it gives you a sort of nice graphical representation of the stages that you're going through. And I don't have anything terribly complicated at the moment. I have something that checks out from code commit and looks for, at the same time, another component that's been built, and then it sends that to code build, and then that sends that to code deploy. That's about as far as I've gotten with the level of complexity. Each of those boxes in the UI hides a host of details and complexities.
Right.
Yep. And I took Maurice. Did take the comment that Tom had made about how it was difficult to find something that gave a high level guide to using all of the various tools together. And I'm going to forward that on to the account team and see if they can point us in the right direction or provide some advice on that front. So maybe they do have some high level diagrams and descriptions that will help us understand how those various tools are intended to work together anyway.
Very good.
I'll just interject briefly that code build, I think, is a pretty new tool. And some of the frustrations that I was working with is that it felt like at some points the documentation was a little bit out of sync with what was actually happening in the UI. And I was like, wait, what?
Yes.
And I know they're working on it.
Yeah, we certainly have seen that with different services. And matter of fact, not only have we seen it out of sync, but we've seen the documentation change like between references, even sort of week to week. So you're working in something new, or you're in a preview and you're looking at the documentation. You go off to try to do something, and you go back and look at the documentation again, and it now is different. Right? Usually it's because they've corrected the documentation or made it more accurate. But certainly, it's a very dynamic environment that you're working in AWS.
Yep.
All right. So next up, we've got a discussion item from Kerry Robertson at UCSC, who would like to talk about reserved instances, who is using them, and what's the best way to manage them with consolidated billing and internal recharge?
Yes. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes. I think we got a thumbs up there. So I'll go jump right in. Speaking for myself, we have consolidated billing, but no internal recharge. So I don't have your pain, which I'm glad about. Sorry to rub that in, Gary.
Thank you.
But we do use reserved instances. Currently, we're only using them for RDS at the present time. Although we will be purchasing reserved EC2 instances for our production environment at the start of the next fiscal year. I personally have some mixed feelings about reservations. Obviously, the good part about them is that they can help you reduce your costs. I think the bad part about them is that they complicate cost reporting and or recharging significantly. And even though there's now a marketplace and mechanisms for changing or modifying, selling your reservations, they definitely can make your life more difficult. Not to mention the fact that I think they're sort of philosophically contrary to the AWS paradigm, which is based on dynamic resources only used and incurring costs when they're needed. So, the concept of a reservation and is sort of antithetical to that. And I have no idea who on earth could actually use a 3-year reservation, because I can't actually accurately forecast what I'm using next year. So the fact that people are out there taking advantage of 3-year reservations sort of boggles my mind.
So do you have any indication on your consolidated bill about where your reserved instance was used, or is it truly just like a coupon at the end where it's just...
I'm sorry, say that again, Carrie. On the consolidated billing, what you'll see, well, what I currently see for the reservations is they have basically 2 different lines on the invoice. And so one line is the on-demand costs, so the ongoing costs, and then I'll have a line which I forget what their terminology is, but that's where your reservations show up. Is basically it's a one-time cost. For myself, we pay all up front because we're not sensitive to cash flow, and that gives you the most savings. But obviously, that would be different depending on what you used. You potentially could use the 1-year reservation with nothing up front, and that might make your life a little bit easier for cost reporting, because that then gives you a regular monthly report instead of what my reports look like, which is this huge spike once a year when I purchase all my reservations, and then
we did the partial, partial up front. So
partial
basically,
up front.
like within a day of that initiation, we got a bill for like half of it, just boom, a big spike, and then it was kind of surprised when the first of the month turned around, like a week or 2 later, we have some billing alarms, and we hit one right away, because the way they did that partial is that the first of the month it was if you do the daily plot of your charges in the cost explorer, there is a huge spike. Welcome to May. Here's your partial payment for May. We're charging against your account right now, and so that's we'll have to settle up when the May bill closes. But it was kind of interesting. So we did the partial up front was about the same net cost as paying for the year up front. We did it for a year, so it was boom. Instantly got an invoice for like half the total, and then as soon as what it looked like is someone had used a ton of EC2. Like
right.
It was like who used $700 of EC2 on Monday or whatever, and it was nobody. It was a reserved instance making the charge.
Yeah, it's very, I find it problematic, and it's still a question in my mind, whether the cost savings is worth the difficulty of doing things like cost reporting and internal chargebacks, whereas that's all very straightforward if you're using on-demand pricing.
Right.
For us, it was worth it. We had we have a few of our bigger instances that we do actually need up all the time, and it's kind of when you've had them up for a year with no plans of doing anything differently, then it's like, okay, we're stupid not to do it. In our case,
Right.
we run loads of other instances that are coming up and down all the time, but this our queue and some of our database stuff, just like, okay, let's just do it and move on.
Yeah, but just so I understand, there is no way to tie the reserved instance to which specific account you got that credit, right? There's no way to limit it.
That is a true statement, because reservations are not actually reserved instances.
Right.
What they are is they're a discount coupon that gets applied towards use, and that could vary on a month-to-month basis, or actually it could vary on an hourly basis, because what happens when you get your hourly billing or cost collection is they look at your use, they apply all your reservations to give you the discounts, and then everything else is on demand, right? And there's no direct tie between the two.
So I know from discussions with the orgs team, that's planning to be addressed in the near future. The one question I had for everybody is anybody using any of the convertible reserved instances that allow you a little more flexibility in terms of kind of scaling up or scaling down within a particular class?
Yeah, I'm not using them, but I think that's a step in the right direction. Again, when I had a naive view of reservations at the beginning, when I started looking into the fact that you're tied into a specific instance type in a certain, back then it was to a certain availability zone. So, once you do that, once you have those restrictions and you're following AWS's sort of reference architecture by distributing things across multiple availability zones, etc., it really cuts into the potential cost savings because you get the most savings if you can have a huge aggregation of the same thing in the same place and apply a bunch of reservations to that.
This is Ed Weil at UConn,
Mm-hmm.
and we use reservations because we've got a very stable system. We're doing SharePoint. We know from month to month it's all going to be up, so we just reserve the whole thing, and so we can enjoy the benefit because we're not seeing a lot of in and out, things being made, things going away.
Right.
And that's the kind of system this is meant for.
Correct. But again, to sort of Carrie's original question, you don't have then the responsibility of trying to distribute that cost off to, other people within the organization as she would as the central IT.
No, we are not distributing that cost because we're core funded.
Mm-hmm.
This is David Kuehl at UCI. I'm relatively new to reserved instances, but what I've noticed in past bills where reserved instances have existed is that in the billing statement, there's a line item with $0 cost. At least that's what it looks like to me. That seems to be where the reserved instance coupon ended up getting applied. Does that make sense?
Right.
You can tell per
matches what we saw.
Okay. So, but it's still not per account. It's at the master payer overall consolidated billing account level that you're seeing.
And that's fine. Okay.
I'm seeing it at the particular account, but at that time, I think the reserved instance was purchased at the particular account level rather than the umbrella account.
Right.
And I think one of the recent changes or I don't know how recent it was, but at least with the reserved instances, it's all within a region now. It's not tied to an AZ.
That's correct. So they're again, they consistently are in sort of improving, so to speak, their reservation instance reservation system. And so more power to them. I think it makes it more palatable and easier for people to use. And so I think we'll be taking more advantage of that over time as it starts to become more flexible. I mean, again, I understand why they're doing it. They, gives them a better ability to forecast and confirm revenue ahead of time, and so that all makes sense. But it's quite challenging on the cost reporting and recharge side of things.
This is Steve from UC Santa Barbara. One of the other issues with billing for the whole year for your customers, if you have multiple tenants in your account, is the storage. So you're going to have to somehow keep track of how much storage and what type of storage, because there's different costs for different types of storage, are being used by that instance or instances. And that's going to be on your monthly bill, even if you do have a reserved instance for 1 or 3 years, you'll be paying that storage. There's a company called Orbitera that actually just got bought by Google, but Orbitera makes this really great kind of dashboard for handling this type of thing, where it might take all of the different types of uses in, let's say, AWS. They actually built it around AWS to begin with, and to be able to provide that kind of a recharge model. So Google's trying to get Orbitera ported into their Google Cloud platform. But if your organization is reselling AWS services, Orbitera is something to look into.
Mm-hmm. And I'll say one other thing, Carrie, is that it's slightly different between RDS and EC2. So for RDS, your reservations are tied to a specific RDS instance, and so it's fairly easy to do the cost reporting and recharge based on that.
All right, thank you.
The other thing to consider too with both storage as well as instances is just kind of your tagging strategy, and there's some best practices around that. But that simplifies some of it, but you still have to feed that information out and then kind of figure out the distributed costs, which fund managers really love to do.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
tagging resources is critical and can provide a lot of benefit for cost reporting.
and maybe AWS sales reps have some advice. I'm sure they've had other organizations who've wrestled with it. And, you know, they want to make it easier for folks to buy stuff, so maybe they've got some ideas.
Well, I'm sure they have a whole queue of sort of features they're working on. That's one of the reasons why they've made the changes they've made over the last couple of years with their reservation system based on feedback from customers in order to make it easier to use. There's a number of third-party tools that are supposed to assist as well that I've looked at briefly but haven't not implemented.
Yeah, I looked at a couple, and one was, for example, it was 3% of your total cloud costs that they wanted in order to make your billing simple, and that's okay at certain levels and not okay as you grow. So I'm still struggling with that piece.
Cloud Checker was another tool we were looking at for kind of looking at our cost spend as well as optimization. It has some other nifty little features in terms of security and best practice suggestions for instances that are out there, but it does a pretty good job with the cost suggestions, so if I can put it that way.
Right, sort of the management of instance reservations.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Anything else on reservations or reserved instances before we move on? All right. So last but not least, Aaron wants to hear from anyone who's went to the AWS Summit event in San Francisco last month about that experience. Again, I'll chime in real quickly because I did. I and two members of my team attended for either the third or fourth year in a row. I forget which. Time melds together. Overall, I feel like it's a good use of our time. Summit has the usual blend of sort of vendor floor where you can interact with third parties, technical sessions, and of course the rah-rah keynote speech. The vendor floor is fairly low pressure. They don't usually tackle you as you walk by the booth, and it's a good way for me to get an environmental scan of what's going on with the third-party tool landscape for AWS. Plus, of course, you can accumulate swag. I think about 2 years ago, I attended with the intention to collect as many T-shirts as possible and came home with about 30. I think about 28 of those were black. So if black's not your color, it might not work out for you. Technical sessions come in 3 levels. So there's sort of like a beginner, intermediate, and advanced sessions. So keep that in mind as you're looking at the schedule and make sure, but it allows you to sort of calibrate your attendance to your level of experience. So that's kind of nice. And the keynote, although mostly it's sort of a rah-rah production, usually has some nuggets of interesting technical or business tidbits thrown in that I find useful. We also managed to meet up with our AWS account team who was attending, and actually I think some of them were actually presenting, so that was an opportunity for us to catch up with the account team and share our experience and ask questions, etc. So that was useful. Other people who attended who want to share something?
Tom is trying to unmute himself here.
All right, now I'm unmuted. So I'd say 4 or 5 of the Connected Corridors developers went to the AWS Summit this year. And I missed the first day. I was out sick that day, but I generally found it very useful and helpful. The sessions were interesting to me as a tech head, and I don't know, it was a good thing to go to.
I think for if you're in the Bay Area, it's free and it's close. So all you're doing is investing the time. I will have one caveat that you do have to, when you're looking at the schedule, you kind of have to be careful because there are sort of vendor sessions or joint vendor AWS sessions that can sneak in there. And so if you're not prepared for that and you're looking for something else, that can be a little bit of a surprise.
Yeah, it felt like a fairly standard conference that way, and I managed to slip out of a vendor session and move over to an AWS session.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is Aaron from Berkeley, and I didn't go to this last month's summit, but I did go a couple of years ago, and I thought it was very worthwhile, and especially in comparison to the Engage conference. I don't know if anybody has also been to the yearly conference that they have that's in Las Vegas, but that costs $1,200, plus you have to fly there, and it's a full week, and it's a pretty big investment. So if we were to choose again here at within the Research IT group, we'll probably continue going to the summits, but not to the reInvent conference.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I think I've sent a member of my team to reInvent every year. I would agree that it's costly and more of an investment of time, and a report back from the last one that it's getting crazy big. So it's tough to deal with.
I did. This is Kevin from UC Davis. I did find a little bit off-putting. A lot of the talks were reused from reInvent. Like the titles were exactly the same and already online.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to do some juggling to figure out which I wanted to take, and ended up in a lot of like the game day and stuff like that room because it was a challenge. And some of the talks I'd seen already. So that was a little bit weird. There was a lot of unique content, except for the second day when they had all the new services coming out.
Right.
Sorry.
All right. Anyone else? Anyone on my team? Joe, Samantha, are you on there? What did you think?
Yeah. Okay. I'll give my feedback on this. So yeah, a lot of those echoed a lot about the education aspect, and some of it is kind of repeated from reInvent, but I think the mindset is depending on what you're looking for. I looked at the what were the topics of what they were going to be discussing at the sessions, and then you kind of gear yourself towards what you're the direction that you want to learn from. I found that the stuff that I got from this past summit was my direction was more security focused, so I dropped in on areas that were security heavy, and liked some particular ones like automating security in cloud workloads with DevSecOps as an example. And although it was, I think that was vendor hosted by Alert Logic, it gave a lot of insight of different ways to capture information, not necessarily using their tools, but using AWS's tools. Like they had some like open source ones, and they also discuss about commercial ones. I guess it's just dependent on the presentation, whether it's going to be more vendor related to their product, or if they're going to be comparing to other tools like AWS or something like something else like Splunk or whatever. But yeah, it's just dependent. But I think it's worthwhile going to it, especially if it's free.
Yeah, it's actually a good point. This year they had an all-day hands-on security lab, basically, and unfortunately we were unable to take advantage of that. But they have events like that again I think are very useful if that's a particular area of focus for you or your team, to get somebody involved in that, and they can sit down all day and focus on a certain aspect of the AWS environment.
I have to say the security jam and game day, which are the two kind of all-day lab things, were really interesting, and I learned a lot out of security jams in particular. And even went back the second day and tried it again because I'm insane. But that was and because I'm like, I really close last time, I could totally do it. That said, if you go and you want to be part of the game, it's gamified. So there's a winner and stuff. If you want to win, go with some people you know and get on the same team. Because in the first one, I was a team of one, and the second one I was a team of one and maybe a little tiny bit. I think I did like 5 labs or something, 10 labs. I did like 8 of them. So, it's a lot of fun though, and I think I learned it touched a lot of tool chains I didn't use before, like System Manager and some of the other kind of more esoteric security tools. Just kind of fun. Also, got to compare Splunk with CloudWatch logs and Redshift, and realized why people buy Splunk.
There you go. All right. So as you heard here, Kevin's recruiting for his game team next year's summit. So if you're in the Bay Area and plan on attending, let him know. He'll sign
let me
you
know.
up there.
We get a free hoodie with that. They give it a hoodie for the security jam that just says winner on it, and you only get it if you win. So if you want one of those unique hoodies.
Fair enough. All right. It looks like we're out of time for this month. So thanks everyone for participating in the discussions. I especially thank the presenters for this week. For those who have something to share or know of someone who has something to share, please get out there and encourage them to sign up for future meetings. And if you are on UCSD's campus or even in Southern California and want to help with organizing the in-person meeting in August in conjunction with UCCSC, please let us know. We'll put you in touch with Adam Tillman and give him some help with getting that off the ground. So thanks again for another wonderful meeting, and everyone have a good month until we speak again. If you want to get a hold of me sooner, my contact information is all over the messages, etc. So please feel free. All right. Thanks, everyone. And thanks again to Aaron for hosting us on his Blue Jeans account.
Thanks, Kurt.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Leave.